Hello everyone, and how are you? Chris Green, the History Chap. It's our normal Friday little wander through British history, and welcome. And I can see Invisible Ray, Jen, you're here. That's fantastic. QAL Library, Hugh de Mortimer, lovely to see you as well. You always can contribute. So lovely to see so many folk here. This is contrary. Those of you who have been on my live calls before, okay, you'll know what the score is. That it's a bit jazz. Those of you who've never been on one of my live calls before, maybe you've seen my normal videos on YouTube, which I have to say I put a lot of time into, a lot of time prepping them and scripting them, recording, getting all the images. Well, that's nothing. The live call is nothing like that, okay? It's a bit more freewheel. I don't have a particular story to tell. What I do is look at the events that happened in British history this week, or this week in British history, whichever way we're talking about. Yeah, but you know what I mean. So those of you who prefer lots of pretty pictures and maps and stuff like that, and well scripted, you might just want to go and check out some of the other videos on my channel, not least the one I did last night, David Niven in the Second World War, which has been going great guns. This, as I say, a little bit more freewheeling. This is an opportunity where I pause a lot of the time, share a little bit about what I've been doing as the History Chap, but also I keep bobbing down and looking at all the comments that are coming in and responding to your questions, your thoughts. If you've got particular theories or wonder why I haven't covered anything, or you've got some pet historical thing that you want to get off your chest and share with us, then by all means stick it in the chat and I will desperately try to respond, just like I try to respond to most of the comments that I receive on YouTube. This morning I spent an hour and a half responding to comments on YouTube. So I genuinely, unless they're slagging me off or they're racist or something like that, I respond to everyone. Those other ones, they get binned. So welcome. I hope that's enough of an intro to folk. Just quickly looking at who else has come on. Tony, lovely to see you. Charlie, good afternoon from chilly North Yorkshire. Yeah, it's pretty chilly here in Worcestershire as well. We've still got frost on the ground on the road. Lovely blue sky, absolutely fantastic. I did think about going for a run earlier, but then I looked at the pavements and thought I'll probably go and knacker myself. That's that sort of middle-aged man thing, isn't it? That we like to believe we're 18-year-olds again. Paddy, lovely to see you as well. Thank you very much for your kind words about the David Niven video. I thoroughly enjoyed researching it, and in fact, actually, really interesting. Hey, I got a great present from Christmas. Sarah treated me, which is very nice of her. But I got a Kindle. And I have to say, absolutely fantastic for researching, not least because I don't have to wait for a book to arrive in the post. I can just download and go for it. And obviously for the David Niven one, I was reading, amongst other things, the Moon's a Balloon, his autobiography. And I have to say, absolutely cracking read. And I'll talk about that in a little while. Okay. So Basmo, thank you. -10 here in Norway. Oh, someone else came to me. Where were they? Stockholm, and they said -12 in Stockholm. So the Swedes are beating the Norwegians just, or so they claim. Hey, but no love lost between Sweden and Norway. Always good old rivals. Kat, listening in from North Carolina, USA. I'm hoping it's a bit warmer in North Carolina, Kat. I'm just going to move my screen ever so slightly. Who else we've got here? Jen. Thank you. Well, yeah, I agree with you. He was a lovely man, lovely actor. Or at least I think he was. He always seemed to come across as that. You never know what happens behind closed doors. I appreciate. But just want to give a quick shout out before we go on to Richard and Hisham, who've recently supported me, joining my members channel here on YouTube. And equally to Darren in Australia for rejoining. And also Don for upgrading to the Trafalgar level, which is like the top level. And Trafalgar level, you get early access to the David Niven, not to the David Niven, to all my videos when I release them. Normally 12, probably 24 hours in advance. So you get a bit of an inside track. So anyway, thank you, because I appreciate that sort of support. Right, so what have we got? I'm going to intersperse this week, rather than going for a normal ramble. I thought we'd intersperse stuff with what's been happening in British history. So let's kick off back on Sunday of this week, the 14th of January, 1814. It's the Treaty of Kiel between Britain and Denmark. Look, cutting a long story short, Denmark had effectively been on the wrong side during the Napoleonic Wars. Well, it wasn't that they actually sided with the French per se. It was just that they were against the British. Long story short, okay. The Treaty of Kiel was a peace treaty between the two nations, and in that treaty, the Danes ceded the island or islands of Heligoland in the North Sea to Britain. Now, Heligoland, you've probably not even heard of it. It's two tiny islands, about 20 miles off the coast of Germany, going out into the North Sea. And 1814, Britain got these two little islands, and they remained part of the British Empire until 1890. They had their own stamps, they had their own flag with the Union Jack on it, and then their own colours. And it became a fashionable spa island. You know, the great and the good of Europe used to go to Heligoland. It's a minute island, well, two minute islands, but even the big one is really small. And it basically consists of a small village or a spa town. And Queen Victoria was very proud of it. In 1890, in a deal with Imperial Germany, Kaiser's Germany, Britain's gave Heligoland to Germany, and in return they got Zanzibar off the coast of East Africa. And some of you might recall that I've done a talk about Zanzibar, shortest war in history. But Britain was recognised as being in charge of Zanzibar. The Germans got Heligoland. Queen Victoria was not amused, but there you go. Interestingly, and she probably would be even less amused if she found out what happened subsequently. Heligoland was fortified by the Imperial German Navy, obviously 29 miles off the coast of Germany, very close to their main naval base at Kiel and also at Bremerhaven, and they fortified it. Became fortified during the First World War. Remained fortified and was even more heavily fortified during the Second World War. It was heavily bombed by the Allies. At the end of the war, it was occupied by the British, who proceeded to blow up the defendable positions on the island. And a massive blast, and many locals haven't forgiven the British for both the bombing campaign and the destruction, the massive blasts on the island. Still remains part of Germany to this day, Heligoland, and population about 1,400. So there you go. Heligoland, a little forgotten part of British history, British imperial history. And of course, fascinates me that there were little bits all around Europe. I mean, most Brits, if you're into 19th century stroke British Empire history, will recognise, obviously, that Gibraltar is still a British overseas territory at the tip of Spain. That you'll probably be aware that Cyprus was part of the British Empire, as indeed was Malta. And indeed, the Maltese had a referendum in the 1950s where they actually voted to be united with Britain and actually send an MP to the British Parliament, to the House of Commons. It was going to be a sort of, but the British never actually followed up on that. And ultimately, Malta was given independence instead. But so these little places. But what's interesting is that there were some others in Europe as well. For a time, the British had control of Minorca, the smaller of the Balearic Islands. So many people go to Mallorca for holidays, but you've got Minorca. Minorca was actually a British territory for a while. And equally, Corfu, another place that the Brits like going on holiday to. In the early to mid 1800s, about 1815 through to about mid 1860s, something like that, Britain had control of Corfu as well. And for a very short time in the French Revolutionary period, they had some sort of control stroke influence on the island of Corsica, which ironically, of course, is where Napoleon Bonaparte's family came from. So there you go, a bit of a rant kicking us off for the 14th of January, Treaty of Kiel, Heligoland. Yeah, it's been a cracking week. Some of you might have been on a little while ago, so I did a test live. I'll talk about that in a while. But in the test live, I happened to mention I did my very first park run last Saturday, 3 miles or 5 kilometers. It was great fun actually, because I didn't disgrace myself, which was really good. Stupidly, I sort of ended up quite near the back to start off with, and so it was really hard getting past people. So my time was reasonably poor. He says, nonchalantly, like you do, but because of course I was getting stuck behind people in bottlenecks. The great news is that I was overtaking loads of people, so hell of an ego trip, but great fun. And it's part of the Keep Fit regime 2024. We're not getting any younger, but creaking and putting on weight in all the wrong places. So there you go. Hugh de Mortimer's just said, we were the kings of the Med. Yes, we were. And interesting, if the British government had followed up on that Maltese thing, if Malta was actually an integral part of Britain now. Interesting. Not least because all the migrants coming across the Mediterranean at the minute who are turning up in Malta's taking the brunt of that, or the boat people coming across the Mediterranean, they would have been landing effectively in part of Britain. And if we think we've got challenges and problems now, I bet we've got even bigger ones if they were landing, loads of them were landing in Malta and effectively saying, oh, well, I'll go to the next county up, wherever that might be, Sussex, Kent, Birmingham, whatever. So there you go. David, Spanish celebrate the retaking of Menorca 6th of January. Well, there you go. Didn't know that, but I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. And yeah, and we would as well, wouldn't we? If the boot was on the other foot. As you know, my view on history is there's always at least two sides to a story. Normally a lot more than that as well. The reason for doing that live talk earlier, for all of 3 minutes, was I was trying to work out if there's a way of putting slides, interspersing these live talks with slides, because I know I talk about things. It wouldn't have been nice then to have thrown up a map of where the hell Heligoland was in the North Sea, or indeed to show you what the stamps and the flag looked like. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem that I'm able to do it. I think you can buy into packages, nothing to do with YouTube, but buy into other live streaming packages. But I'm not a tech whiz kid. You know what I am is a historian, I'm a history storyteller, really. Plenty of professors and doctors of history will probably question if I'm a historian at all. Yeah, I don't want to spend all my life trying to become a techno whiz. All I want to do is be able to share stuff with you. But anyway, can't do that. But that was the reason for that. Let's move on. 15th of January, 1559. Queen Elizabeth I is crowned Queen of England. The second Queen of England, obviously, she followed her sister, Mary. Mary had died in the previous November of November 1558. And so Elizabeth, her half-sister, became the Queen. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. What's interesting on a couple of counts, actually, was this was the last coronation service ever held in Latin. It was half Latin, half English. We're in that crossover period of between the Roman Catholic tradition and the Church of England tradition. It was also the last coronation on a Sunday. And interestingly, in the history of England, all the coronations since back in yore, or at least the days where we know where they were, from 1066 onwards, the most popular day for a coronation is actually Sundays. But we haven't had a Sunday coronation since 1559 with Queen Elizabeth I. The day before, she actually processed through the city. Traditionally, the monarchs used to reside the night before their coronation in the Tower of London. It was a place of safety. It was also a place which basically was the fortress of London. And it was almost a symbolic sign. You know, if I'm in the Tower of London, I'm in control of London. The monarch has arrived. So, and people forget that the Tower of London is still technically a royal palace to this day. Just no members of the royal family have lived there for a long, long time. She processed through the city on the 14th of January, and it was a bit like the coronation procession, but very different to what you saw with King Charles or indeed Queen Elizabeth II back in 1953. It was highly symbolic, and basically it was just in the city of London. So forget Westminster Abbey and the Mall and all that. This was just through the city of London, the Square Mile. And it consisted of 5 pageants. So as she came round, all the cheering crowds, she came to 5 basically stations where there were pageants or plays in honour of her. But interestingly, they were all highly symbolic. So let me just run through them, because I think it's fascinating that it's a different age, very different age to where we're going to come into this one. So her first stop was at Grace Church Street. Now, many of you might know, Grace Church Street, but Grace Church Street, and it was a pageant about her genealogy. So she had to watch a story about her own family tree, and don't forget, it was made for the Queen, but it was made for the population who were watching as well. There was no TV or TikTok or anything like that. So it was played to two people, but had to be acted out for the crowds and the scene. And the basic message was that she was, number one, the legitimate monarch. She was legitimate, despite Roman Catholics, of course, believed that Henry's first wife, he didn't have papal authority to divorce Catherine of Aragon, and therefore his marriage to Anne Boleyn, and indeed all the subsequent wives of Henry VIII, were illegal. And therefore Elizabeth was not the rightful queen because she was illegitimate, as indeed had her half-brother Edward VI been. So this was the genealogy was all about basically, no, she is the rightful queen. She is a legitimate heir to Henry VIII. And it played very heavily on the fact that her mother, Anne Boleyn, as well as her father, were English. We had an English queen, a queen whose parents were English. Unlike the previous person, the Roman Catholic Mary, because she had Spanish blood, boo hiss. Already the English were having a bit of a hatred with the Spanish in their history by this time. So this was very much not only is she legitimate, but by the way, everyone, she's one of us. She's English. The second stop was a pageant about the four virtues: the true religion, the love of her subjects, wisdom, and justice. And these four virtues were trampling their opposite numbers. And it was really to say that the Queen would rule for the true religion, aka Protestant Church of England, that she would have a love of her subjects, which I think she did for her, certainly, and the subjects had a love for her for most of her reign. Started to run out of steam towards the end, but that's nothing. She would rule with wisdom and she would rule with justice. At the third place, well, not so much a pageant, but an acting out, the Lord Mayor of London presented her with a gift of gold, which was really a symbolic thing that there was an interdependence between the trade and commerce of London and having a strong monarch, and the two worked together. And that her wealth depended on the wealth of the City of London. The City of London success, commercial wealth, depended on a strong monarch who would protect them, their markets both in England and abroad. And obviously Queen Elizabeth I certainly protected markets, or certainly looked at markets abroad during her reign. The fourth pageant was, it was actually a woman dressed as Truth. And Truth gave Queen Elizabeth a copy of the Bible. And interestingly, this was not a Latin Bible. It was an English Bible. Hurrah, again, the message for the crowd, okay? She's one of us and she is a Protestant. She doesn't do the Latin Church, the Roman Catholic Bible. She has got an English Bible for the Church of England. And Queen Elizabeth took it from the woman playing Truth and kissed it and held it to her. Well, she first held it to her breast, then she kissed it. To which the crowd, I mean, if you're going to play to the gallery, to a patriotic English crowd, you can imagine the roars that went up. Huge delight. And then lastly, she moved on to Fleet Street, just on the edge of the City of London. And there she was presented. She, again, was another pageant, another woman dressed up as the prophetess Deborah from the Old Testament. And Deborah really was, it was showing that, it was printed about longevity of life. Deborah was almost like the my words, not the official, okay, sort of like the high prophet of Israel, of the ancient Israel, for 40 years, which showed that, we wish her all the very best, blah, blah. Interestingly, Deborah was prophet for 40 years. Queen Elizabeth I was Queen of England for 44 years. So there you go. Yeah, it sort of came to truth. So there you go. Queen Elizabeth I and her coronation on the 15th of January, 1559. I'm just going to look at the comments, how we're going in here. Listening. Oh, yeah. Just getting everyone. Beverly, I understand by TikTok we're at a standstill, but still moving in thick snow in Vancouver. Hey, you can't beat TikTok for sending out completely false messages, can you? And QA Library, I noticed you put something here. Russia is going to break an agreement of letting British fleet fish for cod and haddock in the Barents Sea. Fishing started in 1647, but the formal agreement happened in 1956. Yeah, that's the thing I love about history. Seriously, I love all the old stories, but I love how it relates to now and how, what the world we live in today is because of things that have happened in the past, including that. Good morning from South Carolina. Hello, Leslie. How are you? Hope you're doing very well. Nice to see you. Harry, Harry, good morning to you from USA. Harry's one of my great supporters, and I've got a story for you in a moment, Harry. I promised I would. I don't know if you've seen the comment that I put on my David Niven, or your comment about the David Niven video, but I'll come back to that. Hannah, isn't the Church of England Anglican and therefore Roman? Oh, rather depends who you talk to. It's broken from Rome. They talk of, in the creed in the Church of England, it's Anglican, certainly is Anglican. It's closely aligned to Rome. It's got nothing to do with Rome. The Roman Catholic Church has no jurisdiction on the Church of England. But it is certainly closer to Rome in its liturgy and with bishops and things than, say, the Presbyterian churches and the Puritan churches, which is why, interestingly, of course, Puritans, as well as Catholics, felt victimized both during Queen Elizabeth's reign and indeed in James I's reign, and why Puritans cleared off to New England, or the Pilgrim Fathers cleared off to New England. Hope that answers your question briefly, Hannah. Jen Ingle says, was the London Square Mile based on the Roman city? Absolutely. It was inside the old Roman walls. Obviously, they were repaired over time, but there are parts of the Roman wall still in London to this day, especially near Tower of London, near Tower Hill. And large parts of that, certainly the base of it, is principally the Roman wall. And so, yeah, that was the City of London and the Square Mile. Deborah was a judge of Israel. Thank you, Alec. So a prophet and a ruler. And I think she was a judge of Israel for 40 years. But thank you, Alec. Your Old Testament knowledge, a darn sight better than mine. Thank you. And Railway Thinker, just started watching my channel. Thank you very much indeed for watching my channel. And your granddad was a commando in World War II. Hats off and a lot of respect. A lot of respect to lots of different people in World War II. But I think commandos were a certain breed, as indeed with some of the parachute regiments, certainly around Arnhem time and D-Day. God save the Queen. Thank you very much. Hannah, okay, thanks. Glad I answered your question. Hugh de Mortimer, Church of England, Protestant in worship, Catholic in hierarchy, yeah. And of course the Presbyterians and Puritans as we roll towards the English Civil War, Presbyterians in Scotland, the Puritans in England definitely felt that the Church of England was a bit too close to Rome for their liking, or at least Roman traditions and procedures, as you call it, the hierarchy. So thank you very much. Right, let's crack on then. So we've done those two. So number 6, I've actually got a pecking order. Those of you who, earlier I said I don't really have don't have a script. I'll tell you now. So I was chatting to someone this week about scripts for my videos. So like the David Niven one from last night. That was about 3,000 word script, and it takes me about an hour to write 800 words. So if some of you say it's really well put together, yeah, in the nicest way, it probably should be. It takes about 4 hours. In complete contrast, that's what I'm working off today. All right. Which, if nothing else, probably proves that I've sort of know my history, or at least the bits I want to talk about. So, 15th of January, but coming much later, 15th of January, 1867, the Regent's Park ice skating disaster, or ice skating tragedy. Victorian London. And Victorian Londoners love nothing better, actually, when it got cold and lakes froze over, like the lake in Regent's Park, to get their skates on and go for some fun in the snow. And hundreds of people descended on Regent's Park to the lake there where it had frozen over. And they were having a good day out. It was the weekend. And as I say, there were hundreds. And I mean, hundreds on the, no one's got a proper count, but we know in a moment from the figures I'm going to give you, there were hundreds on the lake. And as they were skating, people started to realize there were cracks developing across the lake. The cracks had actually been made because the park keepers had broken some of the ice to allow the ducks and the swans and geese to get to the water. Only the Brits say we always love our animals, and here we have the park keepers breaking the ice so that they could go and swim around and duck their heads under and try and find some fish or whatever. Unfortunately, they totally undermined the ice on the lake. Cracks started to spread, and then suddenly the ice collapsed. Over 200 people fell into the water. Over 200 were pulled out of the water. Remember, they were wrapped up because it's freezing cold. They were wrapped up in Victorian clothing. So we didn't have any lightweight Nike outfits on here. We had wool, principally wool and cotton, and they fell into the lake. As I say, a couple of hundred of them. The lake was a lot deeper than it is now. It was in places 11 foot deep. They had their skates on as well, and people literally were just dropping through the ice, through the water, and disappearing. People were pulling people out of the water. They were sort of desperately trying to pull people who were floundering. As they were trying to rescue, it was so cold that the open water was starting to freeze over again. It actually took several days to rescue or to recover all the bodies from the lake. And in total, 40 people died in the Regent's Park ice skating disaster. One of the people who fell in and managed to then get out and crawl to safety was a young boy, a teenage boy called Frederick Salu, who lived nearby. Frederick Salu, for those of you who've watched some of my videos in the past or have got you a bit of imperial history, I guess African history, you will know Fred Salu. He became a big game hunter in Africa, an explorer. Many people believe he was the model for the actor and in the character in King Solomon's Mines. But he also led Cecil Rhodes' invasion / occupation of Zimbabwe. And he later fought in the First World War. He was about 60 and volunteered, and he was in the frontier battalion of the Fusiliers. They were called the Old and the Bold because they had so many grizzled old veterans and explorers like him in it. He was killed in action. He was awarded the DSO. He was killed in action in what was German East Africa, now Tanzania, and the Selous National Game Park in Tanzania is named after him, and indeed Selous is buried in the grounds of the national park. So there you go. Excuse me. The Regent's Park ice skating disaster, a bit of social history from Victorian London, just to prove I just don't do battles all the time, just a lot of the time. Hey, Boots on the Table with Dom. Hi, Chris. A bit late. Nice to see you. There's never a bit late. These live things you just dip in and out of. So thank you very much. So anyway, that was Regent's Park. Been a great response this week to my David Niven video that I released last night. It's absolutely going great guns. It's out. YouTube give you these statistics where they'll actually say, since your video was released in X many hours, how does that compare to other videos, the last 10 videos at the same time period? In other words, after they. So we've been going now, where are we? 6, 18, we're about 20 hours in. Well, it's smashing everything. It's way ahead of all the last 10 videos, which is really nice, since there have been some very popular ones like Kohima, the Bridge on the River Kwai, Battle of Waterloo, Theodore Hardy, knocking them out of the park, actually. So thank you very much for everyone's support and everyone who has been sending me comments. Harry, in my video, I mentioned that Niven, when he was about to pass out from Sandhurst, had to name 3 regiments that he was going to go to, and he had his heart set on the 2 Highland regiments, and then in 3rd place he'd put anything but the Highland Light Infantry. And I said in a bit tongue-in-cheek in my video, we all do that, don't we? We always like this. We've all had it somewhere where we've done a funny, and we think it's really funny response, and it always comes back to bite us on the backside. And of course it did for David Niven, because some wag at the War Office saw his smart ass application and obviously decided they'd get their own back by posting him to his 3rd choice, the Highland Light Infantry, or not his 3rd choice, but the Highland Light Infantry. And Harry shared a story with me last night, and I'll share one with you, Harry, because I said I would, but this is for all of you. But I always remember when I was at school, and I was brought up between the ages of 3 and 10 in South Africa, hence my love and interest in South African history and the Zulu Wars in particular. And we were in a school where corporal punishment was something that in South African schools at the time was just meted out like there was no tomorrow. And we're talking 1970s here. And in fairness, in my comprehensive school in England when I came back to England. Yeah, we had a similar sort of thing. But I always remember when I was this is the smart ass bit. There was a kid, and this teacher was losing control of a class, all boys in South Africa, and the lad I was sitting next to had this big, thick ruler. You know, not the sort of rulers that we all buy from W.H. Smith nowadays. We're talking something that looked like a blinking bludgeon, quite frankly. And she grabbed this and she said, "The next child, next pupil who talks, I'm going to slap them over the hand with this ruler." To which I turned to my mate and said, "Well, it can't be you because it's your ruler." And guess who got slapped over the hand with the ruler? So yeah, note to self, which I did take on after that. Be very careful how loudly you make your smart ass comment. But there you go. And several of you mentioned, where did I get some of my information from for the last night's video? Several sources. Always try and look around my sources. Never go to one place in particular, but obviously did use, thanks to my Kindle, I did use the David Niven's autobiography, The Moon's a Balloon. And then, of course, for my Zulu War stuff, I principally used Washing of the Spears by Donald Morris and what's it called? Zulu Rising by Ian Knight. And if you're interested in discovering a little bit more and having a really good read, actually, the David Niven's book's great. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Normally, I skim really fast to find the salient points for my research, but I have to say, I just kept on the pages, turning the page or metaphorical pages with Kindle. I thought it was such a fun book to read. Humble, great stories. You could have sat with David Niven. If he told you those stories, you could have sat with him all night, telling you that. And if you're interested in having that read, or indeed finding out a bit more about the Zulu Wars with the great author Ian Knight, I've actually put links to both books down below. Okay, and just up front, yes, I am an Amazon affiliate. Only I signed up actually today. But so if you click on those links and you do decide to buy a book from Amazon, I get a little kickback. Be honest, I'm going to be buying a Bahamian island based upon it. But what goes around comes around, I guess. But there you go. So two of those, if you're interested, click on the links below. Where are we at? So let's go on with a bit more history then. Actually, no, let's go on and look at what's going on here. Boots on table. Darren Warren, what was his rank? Darren, sorry, Donald Warren, do beg your pardon, mate. What was his rank? Salute, God, he was an officer. I have a feeling he was a colonel, but I could be wrong on that. No, maybe he was Captain Frederick Salute, DSO. That rings a bell. Charlie Manson, Salu Scouts in the Rhodesian War, yet named after him. You're absolutely right there. And Boots on the Table loved the fact that David Niven put his anything but question as David Niven's response, anything but the Highland Light Infantry. Yeah, I think it was great. And Charlie said, "I requested Scotland north of England and not to the south, so they sent me to Cambridgeshire." Yeah, you've got to be careful what you want, isn't it? Ask for. Thank you, Harry. And Sarah Jane, let me just read what you've said. My dad and his twin brother had something similar in national service. Dad joined the RAF to travel and see planes and ended up underground on radar. His twin wanted to stay in the UK and was sent abroad. Life, eh? David and Donna said, David Niven, definitely someone you'd love to have a beer with, or maybe a claret. Yeah, do you know my old village up in Cheshire, in the village, it was the Parish magazine. They used to interview people from the village. You used to have to say a little bit about yourself and blah, blah, blah. And then they used to give a question, who would you, it's a beer call. Who would you have for a beer, or indeed a dinner party or whatever? And that used to be fascinating. But having read The Moon's a Balloon, I think David Niven would definitely be there, because I think he'd be hilarious. Actually, that's an interesting one. Okay, here we go, folks. All right, completely off script now. It's a beer call, or whatever you're going to have. Coffee at Costa, whatever. Okay, beer call. Who would you have with you? Who would be the people that you, or person that you would have for a beer call? I seem to remember back in my Cheshire days. Stick a note in if you this is a bit bit of interplay here. Oliver Reed and David Niven. Bloody hell! I tell you what, Charlie. Well, the only good. Well, if you try to keep up with Oliver Reed, it would be. I was going to say it'd be a night to remember, but actually, you probably wouldn't remember much of it at all. But Oliver Reed had some great stories. Some great stories. There's one about the. Was it one about the Rolling Stones? That I just I loved. Jennings was Oliver Reed and David Niven. Oh, sorry, that's you again. Anyone else? I did think about Winston Churchill, but you know that there's only one thing. You plenty of stories from Winston Churchill, but do you think it would definitely be an audience with, wouldn't it? You know, your presence is only required to listen to his stories, and I do think that, you know, poor old David Niven won't get a word in edgeways if someone like Churchill was there. But Churchill probably could be fascinating. Yeah, who else we got? Tom Baker and Trevor Howard. Oh, Fred Burnaby. Interesting. Fred Burnaby would be an interesting person, wouldn't he? The two outlaws, Churchill and Michael Collins. That would be a cool one, wouldn't it? Keith Moon. Yeah, I think it could be Keith Moon. Anne Boleyn. Should be interesting. She's had a very interesting history, Anne Boleyn, in the sense that, you know, historians have either loved her or hated her, propagandists have loved her or hated her. Vespasian. Wow. Peter Ustinov. Yes, an interesting Sarah Jane. Peter Ustinov. I mean, there's only so much I could talk in my David Niven book. But Peter Ustinov was actually, for a small period in the Second World War, the Batman, or military servant, to David Niven. And then again, of course, they ended up acting together in, was it Murder on the Nile? I think it was Murder on the Nile, which is a great film, the 1970s, early 80s one, whenever it was. Orson Welles and George MacDonald Fraser. George MacDonald Fraser would be an interesting guy because, of course, his Flashman books were really, you know, are historically pretty true, actually. So yeah, he would be rather like Bernard Cornwell. You know, they're both novelists, but they know their stuff. They obviously then spin a yarn, and you know, Bernard Cornwell spins a yarn around Alfred the Great and people like that in the Last Kingdom series. But you know, he knows his stuff. Spike Milligan. Oh, that would be Oliver Reed and Spike Milligan. No, it would be anarchic, wouldn't it? Yeah. Geoffrey Chaucer and Shakespeare. That would be, yeah. Blimey, maybe you should do this more often. And my only crying shame in these lives, okay, here on YouTube, is that I can see your comments. It would be lovely if we were all on screen, a bit like Zoom, and we could open the chat up and just hear your chatting, proper chatting, and see faces of enthusiasm, looks of surprise, etc. Queen Mother should be interesting as well. But so anyway, where we got to 16th of January 1780, the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. Admiral Rodney defeats the Spanish. This is effectively during the American Revolutionary Wars. People may or may not know that it wasn't just where it started as the American colonists, or some of the American colonists, rising up against British rule. They needed help, because let's face it, you know, when you're taking on one of the great powers of the day, some outside help is always useful. And two nations were more than happy to help the American revolutionaries, France and Spain. And of course, you know, the French supplied troops. And of course, they were present at the surrender of Cornwallis at the end of the siege of Yorktown. But so the Spanish, and this was part of the war. This was a naval battle with the Spanish fleet versus the Royal Navy. Royal Navy actually outnumbered the Spanish fleet. It was called the Moonlight Battle. Admiral Rodney actually fought this battle in the dark, in the night, which is very rare actually in those days. Happens more in the movies than it does in real life. And he defeated the Spanish. I think the Spanish had 9 men of ships of the line. He captured 4 of them, sunken or destroyed another one, for the loss of no Royal Navy ships. So a great victory for Admiral Rodney. And of course, I used to drink at the Admiral Rodney at a pub. It's in Woolerton in Nottingham when I used to live in Nottingham. and I just thought it was a great name. But it sounded like something out of Treasure Island. But I never knew the story of Admiral Rodney until I started researching the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. And yeah, he came from that raft of, there was about a 30-year period where the British produced a whole series of incredible naval commanders. They're just all overshadowed by Nelson, but there were many who were great commanders in their own rights, and probably could have held, actually, Britain could have held their own, maybe, without Nelson. But when you've got Nelson on your side as well, that just tipped the scales completely and put the Royal Navy ultimately in a position that was unchallenged for the best part of a century. So any connection with Rodney's Pillar near Welshpool? Lee, I don't know. I stand to be get anyone who does know, please stick it in. I'll do some more research because I'd actually like to do a video about Admiral Rodney and either probably Admiral Rodney and the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. Although, as you know from my videos, I never just concentrate on the event, do I? I always like to give a few side stories, and sure as heck, I would give a bit of a backstory to Admiral Rodney when I do that. Cummins Archive, just back on the beer call. Tolkien and Darwin. Interesting, and I've had requests for both of those to do talks about both of those people, and I will do this year. Tolkien in particular, really interesting that a lot of his big battles in Lords of the Rings were sort of based upon his experiences on the Western Front during the First World War. So there you go. Interestingly, 16th of January, same date as the Battle of Cape St. Vincent in 1780. In 1809 was the Battle of Corunna in the Peninsular War. I'm not going to go into that in any detail, but look it up if you want. One of the many battles fought in the Peninsular War during the Napoleonic Wars. So there you go. Expat, I feel you're into the Friday moves. Was he any connection to Rodney of Stuart's sailing? Who knows? And Leslie has requested, could we possibly do Douglas Bader? He'd be interesting. He's on my list, Leslie. I'll respond to what I put in the comment to someone who asked me. Someone wrote into me, actually. Sorry, it was an email that someone wrote in about just about covering things. Biggest challenge I've got on YouTube, okay, is trying to cover different eras without alienating people. And I know, if I did the Elizabethan England, that would definitely alienate people that love the Second World War, or a large group of them, not everyone. And it's trying to take people on a journey so I don't get lost in the weeds. Likewise, why I only stay on British history and don't venture into French or Mexican or anything else. Not because I think they're not worthy. It's just purely that, quite frankly, I've got enough on my plate just talking British. So there you go. Sidney Smith is going to be coming very soon, as is Cochrane. So yeah, two great naval commanders again. Interesting stories relating to the South American revolutions against the Spanish, and many British, I guess, soldiers of fortune, for want of a better phrase, or sailors of fortune, for a better phrase, ended up fighting with the revolutionaries in South America. Really interesting stories. Battlefield Trust did a great Zoom call recently about the English Legion fighting in Ecuador, and that was fascinating. And I will cover the English Legion myself at some stage, but there you go. Right, so we've done the Battle of Corunna, went off on one of those. Okay, 17th of January, 1912. Captain Robert Falcon Scott arrives at the South Pole. Hurrah! Another British success, except of course it wasn't. Those of us who know our thing. First British men to arrive at the South Pole. They'd been in a race against a Norwegian team led by Amundsen. And when they got to the South Pole, they found a tent and what remained of a Norwegian flag that had been battered in the wind, and a note from Amundsen. And basically, Amundsen had got there nearly 30 days before them. Crestfallen, they now had to try and make their way. His 5-man team had to try and make its way back to the coast. And as most of you will know, they perished on the route. And I'd like to tell, maybe Scot of the Antarctic is one of those ones that, there's a whole generation of children, pupils brought up in Britain, told the stories. I don't think it's told very much nowadays. So I'd love to tell that. There's some great Arctic stuff and Antarctic stuff, stories, not least his rivalry with Ernest Shackleton, and indeed Shackleton's attempt to get to the South Pole, where he came back and he didn't lose a man, unlike Scot. The Shackleton's last polar expedition, sorry, not his last polar, but the one where he was trying to cross the Antarctica, where they got stranded, epic journey of to find safety, to find help, has been covered a lot of times. Probably won't be doing that, but his first expedition, where he nearly got to the South Pole ahead of Amundsen, ahead of Scot, might be an interesting one to talk about. But there you go. Where are we at? 18th of January, so yesterday, as it were, in history, 1936, 18th of January, 1936, Rudyard Kipling died. Rudyard Kipling, still noticed. I mean, there was a BBC poll a few years ago now, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Britain's favourite poems. Might actually be longer, more like 20 years ago. And If won the BBC poll of the general public. Rudyard Kipling's If won the poll, and I understand it's still one of the most popular poems at funerals as well. So he was Rudyard Kipling. Was born, he was brought up in India. Born in India, brought up at boarding school in England, but then worked a large part of his early life in India. He's very much seen as a trumpeter, an apologist for the British Empire, especially in India. And, he's wrote some great stories like Kim and of course, the Jungle Book. But he was also, some great poems. Of course, he wrote the poem "The White Man's Burden," which is, if you read it, you can read it in several ways. I think the easy way to read it would be simply to say that actually it's saying, actually it's a duty of white people to go and basically be servants of the empire. But he also, of course, wrote If, and If was, most of us see it as like a poem about resilience, really, and it is. It was actually written for Dr. Jameson after the Jameson raid, when, of course, he was being pilloried, he'd been arrested, put on trial, or he's about to be put on trial in Transvaal. That was commuted. They negotiated, and Jameson was put on trial in Britain instead. Let off reasonably easily, seeing as he had where have we got? We've got ads appearing, I'm being told, in 51 seconds. Okay, but Jameson went off, and he was he was pilloried, and the If was written about him and his failed attempt for basically a coup d'etat on behalf of the British Empire, or at least on behalf of Cecil Rhodes in the Transvaal. So, interesting. But what's interesting for me about, not forgetting Kim, Hugh de Mortimer, of course, Kim. Did I mention Kim just now in my stories? But of course, another great one, The Man Who Would Be King. Great film as well. But now, just while we're on, we've got 14 seconds before some ads are going to appear. So I'm just going to mention, no, I won't. I'm going to just give you a moment so that you don't miss all my video, miss all that. And ads have now been inserted. Yippee-yay. Thank you, YouTube. Well, there you go. It's the game we play, isn't it? Whilst he was seen as a apologist, trumpeter for the empire, he was also quite keen to, he was acutely aware of the empire's limits. And there's a poem he wrote called Recessional, which was all basically about when captains and kings depart. And it was all basically about sometime the British Empire will come to an end. So it's an interesting one. He was seen as this, and many people nowadays will see him as, Rudyard Kipling, White Man's Burden and all this sort of stuff. But he was acutely aware that it was a moment in time, that all empires eventually finish and fall. And he was aware of that. The sad sort of end to his life, really, in many respects, is that he pulled all the strings at the beginning of the First World War, naturally, trumpeter of the British Empire, great patriot. He pushed young men, he was vocal that every young man should sign up to the British Army or to the British Armed Forces. He had a bit of a problem with that because people said, where's your son? Why hasn't he joined up? His son had actually failed the army medical. He was short-sighted. But Kitchener lent on the military authorities to do him a bit of a favor, and he was, he was a celebrity at the time, and he basically lent on the authorities, pulled as many strings as he could, and his son Jack ended up in the Irish Guards. Jack was killed at the Battle of Lewes, and to a certain extent, Kipling, well, not to a certain extent, Kipling never forgave himself for pulling all those strings to get his short-sighted son into the army, who was killed. He was with the Irish Guards, and Kipling actually wrote the history of the Irish Guards in the First World War. A really good read, fascinating read for those of you. That's not on my affiliate link down there, by the way, in Amazon. But a really good read. He also wrote a poem with that sense of loss in mind. It was actually called My Boy Jack. My Boy Jack, My Son Jack. I'm just looking here because I've suddenly gone My Boy Jack, and it's quite, it's a very sad song. Has anyone heard from My Boy Jack? Interestingly, whilst he might have had his son in mind when he wrote it, it wasn't written about his son. It was actually written about Jack Cornwell, who was one of the youngest men ever to receive the Victoria Cross. He was killed at the Battle of Jutland. He was about 16, came from East London, and I'm going to do a story about him and the Battle of Jutland at some stage. I think it's a fascinating story. He was so young, he'd only recently left the Boy Scouts, and there is still a scouting award to this day, the Jack Cornwell Award in scouting, British scouting at any rate. So there you go. That's Rudyard Kipling, and of course, as I say, never forget The Man Who Would Be King with film became Michael Caine and Sean Connery. That was great. Jen's asked, what happened to Jack Kipling's sister? Any surviving? I don't know is the answer. Anyone who does know about the Kipling family, and no one put in, he makes exceedingly good cakes. Yeah. Just pause you there before we do. Let me just have a quick look how we're all doing. Bill, you're here. You slept in. It's nice to see you, Bill. The nice thing about these live talks is you can just, you can jump in and out, can't you? Lee. Not quite sure. I'm not quite sure that a couple of those questions from both Leslie and QL Library, not quite sure where we're going with those. That's just me not being able to understand, not necessarily you. Paddy, yeah. You saw My Boy Jack at the theatre before lockdown in 2018. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Yeah. I find the poem very sad, and with a son of military age called Jack, it hurts me a bit when I read it. But there you go. At least my Jack's not in the military. Came very close, actually. Very nearly joined the RAF, but decided he couldn't put up with the discipline. He'd been an air cadet for donkey's years. He was a sergeant in the air cadets. Flight sergeant maybe even. And anyway, he I think he'd had enough of marching around and being on car park duty at various county shows and air shows. That killed his love of the RAF off. Jack Cornwell is recognised by a blue plaque on his house, on his school in Hornchurch in Essex. Thank you, Michael, for sharing that. I was aware that there was a sort of Essex, East London connection there, so thank you very much. Hugh de Mortimer, you caught me out about the cakes. I knew someone was going to go for it, and all my American viewers are looking at, thinking, what the hell is he talking about? The Brits, we all know he makes exceedingly good cakes. Frederick Russell Burnham, DSO, served in the British Army and helped form the Boy Scouts. He'd be a great video. Ronald, thank you very much for that suggestion. I'm actually going to add it to my book at the end. Those of you who know, in fact, in a moment, maybe I won't do it. I won't pause and write it down, but most of you will know I have loads of suggestions coming from YouTube. Look at them all. I don't have to think very much still about what I'm going to do. Burnham, very interesting man, American scout. He taught Baden-Powell a lot of his backward woodcraft skills. And indeed, he introduced Baden-Powell to his style of cowboy hat that Burnham wore. And that was the cowboy hat that Baden-Powell then adopted and went into scouting, not in British scouting nowadays, but I understand still in the USA they wear the big wide brim hat. Could be wrong on that, but there you go. QAL library. Sorry, Sarah Jane. It was not until after my nan's death we found out what she did in World War II. She won a crossword competition and ended up at Bletchley Park. Amazing that. Great story. Thank you very much for sharing, Sarah Jane. Funny enough, I was talking on our forum only this week with my old schoolmates. We're now thinking of having a reunion. 40 years plus since we last saw each other in many cases. And we were talking about the old French teacher, and she was at Bletchley Park, and it never came out till her funeral in the late 90s, early 2000s, that she'd been at Bletchley Park. So yeah, some of them, it's a different generation. Can you imagine it now? You'd be at Bletchley Park and people be doing selfies and God knows what else. You're doing a bit of TikTok. Here I am trying to crack the German code at Bletchley Park. Thank you, Charlie. And Paddy. Oh, okay, fine. Thanks very much. Keep your comments coming in. Apologies for those of you if I take a time to have a look. I'll try and give you the credit of if you've taken the time to put something in there, I'll try and take the time to read it. So apologies for those of you who think, well, just get on with the history, Chris. It's different to the prepared video. It's all right. Where are we at? Oh, now I've just got to make a call because he's been thrown in a few. Got a big shout out to Dom. Dom has a great YouTube channel. It's a wargaming YouTube channel. So I don't know if any of you are into wargaming, with all the little soldiers, but he's got this great channel called the Plastic Crack Podcast. In fact, let me just see if I can quickly. That's the link. But don't go there now because you come off my channel then, won't you? Sorry, Dom, but deal's a deal. But I'll also put it in the description at the end of this, okay? But Dom's channel, great. I was actually invited on this week. We had a brill session. It went on for 2 hours. You think this goes on for a long time? It went on for 2 hours. And if you're into wargaming and just want to hang out with other people who are in that wargaming community and hear some really interesting stories about what other people are doing, but also get guest speakers, then go to that one. Follow that link. You'll hear me twittering away. And actually, it's quite good. I tell a bit, some of the, what they call it, back scenes of the history chap that you don't get. I don't tend to share here. A little bit more candid about some of the comments I get and things like that. So check it out. And thank you, Dom, very much for inviting me on there. Where are we going? Oh, just those of you talking, coming up for future video, proper video, this is 99 Days in Peking, okay, and the Boxer Rebellion. So I don't know if that's going to interest anyone, but I thought I've done enough of Africa for the time being. And you know I love the Zulu Wars. I've fallen in love with the Mahdists, the whole wars with the Mahdist forces in Sudan. But I thought, time to move off. So I thought we'd do the 99 Days in Peking, the film, and how close it is to reality, but then also start to explore what the Boxer Rebellion was all about. And the fact that, of course, there was this multinational army who went to rescue the embassy that was besieged in Peking, or Beijing as it's now called. And so that's going to be my next one. A bit of a project. Really got to get my head around that one. I might do a small one about British history in the meantime, but certainly by the end of next week we'll have the Boxer Rebellion coming out. And of course David Niven starred in that one as well, didn't he, in 99 Days in Peking. So I'm just looking here. Bill Evans, I've got some kits for war games, but my old eyes and hands, lots of laugh, not finishing them. Yeah, there's some people that put a lot of time and effort on that site, Bill. And someone asked me, actually, have I ever done wargaming? No, because I don't have the patience. I mean, to delicately paint little things is not my forte whatsoever. Likewise, I love cooking, but cake decoration, all that sort of thing, not my cup of tea, I'm afraid. Whiskers, old boy, well done. Look, I've been clean shaven all my life, Jeff, and I just thought, give it a go. Actually, it wasn't giving it a go. I was just lazy last weekend, and by Monday I thought, and Sarah said, okay, jury out. I don't know if I like it or not, but let's see how it goes. So that was good enough endorsement, wasn't it? So we're going to let it run, see what happens. I was out on a walk yesterday and it was blinking cold, except not around there. It wasn't. It was quite cool. But anyway, there you go. So, but have British American. Sorry, late here, but have I reviewed Napoleon? I did review Napoleon a few ago, and I won't do it a few weeks ago, actually, pre-Christmas, actually, British American. Let's see if we've got time at the end to come back to that one today, if needed. But I have done it, and I don't want to bore everyone with the same thing, because let's face it, I bore everyone with everything else I talk about. So, so where are we going? So that look out for 99 Days in Peking and the Boxer Rebellion, China, at the turn of the 20th century. What else we got? Back to what happened in British history this week. 19th of January, today, hooray, we finally got to the 19th of January. It's 1915, the first Zeppelin raid on Britain. L3 German Zeppelins, L3 and L4 left Germany to do a bombing raid across the North Sea on Humberside, obviously principally Hull, but possibly if they got the chance, they might drop some stuff on the port of Hull. But if they had a chance, maybe Grimsby, Cleethorpes, Scunthorpe could get a few bombs as well, because they were reasonably important to the British war effort. Hull was an important port on the east coast of England. Weather, as ever, on the North Sea hampered their progress, and eventually, to try and get away from the bad weather over towards Hull and the Humber estuary, they turned south. The L3 flew over Great Yarmouth in Norfolk and released 10 bombs on the sleepy town of Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. It's Mary Taylor and a man called Samuel Smith were killed. Samuel Smith was a 53-year-old shoemaker in the town, and he was standing in the street watching the Zeppelins come over, like you would really. I mean, I guess it's, if you've never seen one before, you're probably standing in awe. You didn't realize they were going to throw 10 bombs out, directly into your street where you're standing. And Samuel Smith holds the unenviable record in British history of the first British person to be killed in an aerial bombardment. Not the very first aerial bombardment, actually, because in December 1914, just coming up to Christmas, I can't remember if it was it might have even been Christmas Eve, 24th of December, but a German plane flew over Dover in Kent and decided to drop a bomb. He had like one bomb with him, almost like a giant hand grenade sort of thing, drop it over the side of his plane. He decided to drop it on Dover Castle, which those of you who have ever been to Dover and Dover Castle, it's a big place, Dover Castle. He managed to miss Dover Castle, cracking, and it dropped into a garden in a nearby street and blew the gardener off his pair of ladders. Or he was a gardener, he was in a tree, he was pruning some trees or doing something in a tree, and he blew the gardener off. So the gardener got injured, not killed, but probably a bruised ego if nothing else, but not as bruised as the aircraft pilot when he got back to his base, and probably had to explain how he'd managed to miss the whole of Dover Castle as he flew over it. But anyway, first air raid from a Zeppelin, L3, Great Yarmouth, first man ever killed in Britain, first person killed in Britain from an aerial bombardment, Samuel Smith, age 53. The L4, by the way, that was following in the L3's wake, heading south from Humberside from the rubbish weather up there. That flew over King's Lynn, and it dropped its bombs on King's Lynn, but in a time scale slightly after Great Yarmouth. So Great Yarmouth was the first town to be bombed by aerial bombing in Britain, from a Zeppelin. So there you go. The Zeppelin campaign, interesting, as indeed were the Gotha raids, the bombers that the Germans actually sent. A lot of people don't realize that the Germans actually sent bomber planes over London later in the First World War. That was the very first London Blitz. And got some great stories from that I'd like to come up, including based on the Zeppelin campaign. I'd like to tell them at some stage, including Leif Robinson, VC, the first man to ever shoot down a Zeppelin over Britain. So, but that's to come. 20th of January, 1265. Simon de Montfort called the first English Parliament. And when he says, when we call it the first English Parliament, parliaments had taken place before them, but they'd only ever been stuffed with the clergy and the barons. And not going into the whole history of Simon de Montfort had a massive falling out with the king, King Henry III, And he had actually basically been a civil war. Barons, or a large part of the barons, had risen with Simon de Montfort against King Henry III. They defeated King Henry III at the Battle of Lewes down in Sussex. Henry III was captured, as was his son, and his son Prince Edward, Prince of Wales. And with them in custody, he then called a parliament. And what was unique about his parliament was, for the first time ever, he requested representatives to come from the towns and the shires, which would ultimately become the House of Commons. And every parliament after that included representatives from the towns and the shires. And so he's credited, Simon de Montfort is credited with, being the man who, the grandfather of the British Parliament. It's certainly a long way to go and compared to the British Parliament of today. Simon de Montfort came to a sticky end. There was some nasty sides to his fight for democracy, in inverted commas. We've got to remember these are barons, and what the barons really were interested in doing at the time was increasing their power versus the king. There wasn't the barons suddenly deciding to rise up against the king to sort of help the peasants. That really wasn't part of the agenda. And the townsfolk and the shires were only invited because he needed them there for legitimacy and for potential tax raising purposes, rather than because he was fighting for democracy in some sort of Jeremy Corbyn style, Tony Benn style of fighting for democracy. A nasty aside to him was that he unleashed and personally endorsed a wave of pogroms and attacks on Jewish inhabitants in England at the time, which is one of his more unseemly things. Some people now say, de Montfort should sort of be stripped of, his accolade of the founder of English Parliament because of that. History's history, and you've got to weigh up: did he make a step forward for British democracy? He sure as hell didn't do a step forward for race relations with the Jews. But should he still be seen as an architect of parliamentary democracy, parliamentary representation as we see him now? Came to a sticky end because Henry III's son, Edward, the Prince of Wales, managed to escape. And those of you who know your English history will know that man, he ultimately succeeded his father as king, and he became King Edward I. That's the King Edward I who defeated the Scots, the hammer of the Scots. That's the man, the Edward I who conquered North Wales and snuffed out Welsh independence. So he was a bit of a warrior, and eventually he raised a royal army. They had a showdown with Simon de Montfort at the Battle of Evesham. And what's really interesting, not only was Edward victorious, but Edward actually had gathered a group of crack knights to shadow de Montfort during the battle. So they were on their side. Obviously, you got the two sides, but there was this, everywhere de Montfort went, this group of crack knights followed him, waiting for an opportunity to go in and get him. And effectively, that's what happened in the battle. Long story short, I would like to do a story about the Battle of Evesham because it's not far away from where I live. And the battleground is still there. It's open fields, fascinating. But there you go, complete digression. But Simon de Montfort, there we go. Where are we at with folks here? My parents watched both World War blitzes from Watford, where all the family relatives. Yeah, I know people who said that they could see it from Hertfordshire and Watford, seeing London skyline just red. I certainly know people from Birmingham who said that they could see the skyline red when Coventry was bombed. I'm guessing Germans would have exactly the same stories from bombings in Germany. My nan reckoned everyone up on Enfield Chase. Enfield Chase was alive with Nazi spies with radio packs and probably wearing long leather jackets and trilby hats. She was convinced they were all up there watching London. I've not seen any evidence that a single spy was up there, but hey, who am I to argue with my nan? She was a feisty woman. When she visited us in South Africa, I said earlier that I was brought up in South Africa. I always remember she came and saw us, and I don't know what she was then, maybe only 60. She's always my nan. She always looked old, but she might have been a bit older actually. But I remember the door-to-door salesman, the fruit and veg man, used to come, and he came as an Indian guy. He was talking to my mum, and suddenly there was this screaming at the front door. He was screaming, my mum was screaming. My nan didn't know what was going on. She came storming down. I always remember do you remember those Tom and Jerry cartoons where there's a maid, housemaid, and you only ever see like almost like her bottom of her legs and her little slippers. Well, and that's what I recalled about my nan. She had these pink fluffy slippers, and she came storming down the hallway. What the bloody hell's going on here in a North London accent? And there was this massive baboon spider, which is like a tarantula, climbing up the wall next to where they'd been talking. So, let's face it, I probably would have screamed now if I suddenly saw this bloody thing coming past me. And my nan, just classic North London, she's, oh, damn stupid bloody spider. And she took a slipper off and belted this tarantula, killed it. So anyway, that's my nan. So who am I, based on a woman like that, to tell her that she's probably telling a load of old rubbish about the stories of Nazi spies running around on the Enfield Chase? But there you go. So that's really the end of this week's tirade ramble through British history. It's been a busy week. I did a talk yesterday, part of my series for the Restless organisation. I'm doing a series about the Stuarts at the moment. And yesterday's was all about the Civil War, which was fascinating. And maybe I should do something about the Civil War. I'm actually going to be doing a private series about the English Civil War, probably about 5 talks, live but recorded. Put some resources in there like family trees and stuff as well. So anyone who's interested in that, it will be a paid for series, a private series. You'll have access to it. If you're interested, pop over to my website, thehistorychap.com, and sign up for my newsletter. And then obviously in my newsletter, you'll be told about it. It's work in progress at the minute. But if you're interested in really getting into the weeds about the English Civil War, why did it start? What the hell happened? Who were the big characters? What happened at the let's finish it off with a bit of the Cromwell and indeed the Restoration when Cromwell died. Then by all means, pop over onto my website and do something. I would like to do something like that here on YouTube as well. But there's a bit of a niche bit there. You can go too deep into the Civil War. And there's just folk who are like, you've gone too deep there, Chris. You've gone niche. And don't forget, YouTube doesn't reward you for niche. And I don't mean financial reward. Basically, if no one watches your video, okay, the next time you release a video, they remember that and they say, maybe people like you aren't that interesting, Chris Green, so it won't come up on your home screen. So there is a bit of a game you have to play with YouTube. So if you're interested in the English Civil War, pop over to the website, thehistorychap.com. Just sign up for my free weekly newsletter, and you'll know that I just tell you what's going on, my latest podcasts, YouTube videos, so you never miss those either. So that's that. Lastly, I just want a big call out to thank, and actually not, I'm going to just look at this. Thanks for Manila time to time work. Jan, thank you very much for your support. Cavaliers beat the Roundheads eventually. Yes, they did eventually, not in the English Civil War, but you're right. Although you could argue exactly when did the Cavaliers beat the Roundheads, and indeed did the Roundheads ever get their own back? Welfare state, Labour governments. Was that Roundheads, Cavaliers? I mean, we're pushing history here, aren't we? But there you go. Thank you very much, Michael, for the Pax Britannica podcast, or suggesting it. Don't forget, folks, we have got down below here in the description the links to the 2 books, or 2 of the books that I used in my talk this week. Okay, Lee Davies, thank you very much for sharing about Admiral Rodney's pillar. That will be the Admiral Rodney that we're talking about at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. Sir George Rodney. Didn't realise his middle name was Bridges Rodney, but yeah. The University of Virginia call themselves Cavaliers. That's cool. Did you know, actually, there was a battle, a Civil War battle, English Civil War battle in North America. Yeah, I think it was in Virginia, actually. Maybe, Michael. Could be wrong on that. Definitely not in New England. The colonies sort of split. There wasn't a full-blown war in North America, but there was one battle. Obviously, New England, no surprise, with their whole Puritan background, supported the Roundheads in England. Further south, the more genteel, hierarchical states like Virginia were more behind the king, as were some of the colonies in the West Indies, like Barbados, Bermuda. There you go. So there you go. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me today. Big shout out finally to my members of my supporters club. membership club here on YouTube, in particular my Trafalgar members. I'm just going to name you because I think you're worth it, because you put your hand in your pocket. So, thank you very much to Ed, Michael, Joe, Craig, Jeremy, B. Wallace, don't know what your B is, Harry, thank you very much, Harry, Darren, and Don, my Trafalgar members. Plenty more at the Waterloo level, which is the entry level. Thank you all as well for all of you guys. It will take a lot longer to read all your names out. So thank you to all of you for your support. Next week, join me. We'll be doing it this time. I have put a poll out recently to all my people in my newsletter, asking when the best time for live calls is. There seems to be quite a strong feeling towards 7 p.m. UK time. Now, I don't know whether that works for any of you. And, I know we're finishing now, but if you think, would you prefer 7 p.m.? Would you prefer this sort of time? Or would you prefer maybe mornings in the UK, like 11 a.m.? Any thoughts, please put them here, or indeed drop me a line. You can send me an email, again, through my website, thehistorychap.com, and hit the, what's it called, contact button at the top, okay? But anyway, next week, next Friday, we'll be here again. Definitely going to do this one here. And what are we going to be covering? Well, I'll tell you, give a heads up now. It's a bit of a battles week, and that's just the way history sometimes falls. But we've got next week, we're commemorating the Anzio landings in the Second World War, where my granddad was. You can see him there. That's his war medals up there. Get my finger right, including he's mentioned twice in dispatches at Anzio, and General Clark actually. I don't think he personally, General Clark, did anything, but he arranged for my granddad and his brother-in-law to meet up in Florence later in the war for a bit of R&R. But we got Anzio landings. We've got the crucial two the most famous battles in the Zulu War next week, of course, the Battle of Isandlwana and the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Then also staying in South Africa, Boer War, Speenkop. Disaster for the British, great for the Boers and the Afrikaners. We also have Gordon of Khartoum meets his end in Khartoum. That happens next week as well. And finally, Queen Victoria's first grandchild is born. And I'll give you the spoiler alert. It's Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. Hooray! So anyway, we'll be talking about that in a lot more detail next week. In the meantime, have a brilliant weekend. Hopefully the sun shines, the weather's not too cold for you. A great week ahead. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you either with next week's video or in the next live. Take care.